everyone, my name's Julie Grundy and I'm a digital accessibility consultant with Intopia. I'm here to talk to you today about web animations and making them safe for everyone. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Whadjuk Wurrung, which is the Perth land that I'm recording on today, and to honour the elders past and present. So when it comes to web animations, we have some accessibility considerations which those of you who are experienced will already be familiar with. But animation can cause problems for people if you're not aware of this already. People with vestibular disorders can end up with what seems like a very severe motion sickness when things start moving around the screen. People who get seizures or migraines can have problems with flashing, very fast flashing colours, and people with attention disorders can get distracted from their task when they are working with things that have got little blips and bloops and things moving all over the place. So given that these can be quite serious problems, why would we even animate anything in the first place? When we ask designers and developers about this, we get a number of reasonably predictable answers that I'm sure you would have heard before. It looks cool, so we should. But Google does it is a really popular one. Our brand is positioning itself as sophisticated and cutting edge, and animation is definitely a part of that. Or our target audience is fun and playful, and we want to reflect that back at them with some fun, playful animations. Compared to things like seizures or motion sickness, these don't seem like very worthwhile kind of causes. But I think there are actually better reasons to animate things, and I'm just going to see if I can persuade you to give animation a little bit more consideration in your work. The first reason is that accessibility has a little bit of an image problem. People accuse us of being boring and ruining all the fun. This is mostly not true, but sometimes it's a little bit true. We do tend to spend a lot of time saying, stop that, it's terrible. So if we could animate things and make it a little bit more cool and interesting, I think that would be worthwhile, because accessibility should be cool. It should be beautiful and amazing. And people with disabilities deserve to have sophisticated, cutting-edge, fun, playful websites just as much as anyone else does. I think we should be aiming for wonderful user experiences more than we aim for mere technical compliance. So that's one reason I think we should maybe consider a little bit more animation. The more important reason, though, is that animation can have benefits for people with some types of cognitive impairments. We're only talking about some types of animation here, not all of it. What we're looking for is things which are smart, subtle, useful. There's never enough research onto issues with cognitive impairments, but I think this will hold true. So if you bear with me, I'll lay out my reasoning. The first point to consider is that our brains see things, process visual information in two ways, not just one. We have a aware system, which is mostly to do with motion, edges, contrast. It's tied into how we construct our sense of location within an area, and with our other senses such as hearing or touch. The other system is called the Watt system, and that relies on colour, on shape. It's where we recognise faces and objects. And that system ties in very much to our memory, to our abstract reasoning, and to our language processing. It's slower to work because it has a more complex and more difficult job to do. So keep these in mind as we think about the next couple of points. Modern websites are getting incredibly complex. I've got Jira here as a bit of an example, but any web app that you look at or any giant e-commerce site has multiple menus. We hide some of them using little hamburger menus and slidey bars and filtering through products and tab panels to try and reduce the amount of content that we're seeing on screen at any one time. But what this does is it increases the cognitive load in terms of remembering what we just did to change the interface. It relies very much on our experience of what icons mean, and what they represent, or how similar websites have worked. And it relies very much on our language processing in order to understand what a very short single word menu command might be. So we sort of end up putting all of this cognitive load on people, and particularly for people with cognitive impairments, I think it puts a load on a system which is already working very hard to get along and to understand what's going on. So what I'm suggesting is that animation, because it is a visual representation of change, and because it uses the where system rather than the what system of our visual processing, can be really useful for reducing that cognitive burden. We can end up with using motion and contrast in order to demonstrate a change instead of having to explain it to people, or to just assume that they already know what it means so we don't have to explain it. In fiction writing, there is a phrase called show, don't tell, and I think that this applies to website design as well. You could explain to people and give them an instruction and say, if you wish to reduce some of the menus on this page, you can click the cross icon, which is up in the top right corner, and it will remove the menu. And if you wish to open the menu again, you could click on the hamburger menu, and then you would need an instruction to explain what a hamburger menu is, and so on and so forth. Animation is not going to save you from poor information architecture. It is not going to save you from naming your menus poorly, and it is not going to save you from any other accessibility mistakes or errors that you might have. I'm suggesting a very limited benefit where we can take a good website and improve its usability and reduce its cognitive load. It's not going to fix real problems, but it could take your website from good to great. You'll also notice that I'm not suggesting any animations like 3D spinning logos or scrolly parallax effects, or any severe flashing colors. If you're having any of those sorts of things, I think that's outside of the realms of what accessibility can help with. And if you're at all worried about breaking the flashing rule at level A of 3 flashes or below, that is way too much animation for any website, let alone user interface. So, we're talking about some types of animation. When we talk about good animation, we're talking about animation which is fast, useful, subtle. It should be like the animation is responding to the user input, not that it's like we're showing a movie for them to sit back and enjoy. A lot of the work around this about what the difference between good animation and poor animation is in the books that I've already quoted by Val Head and Rachel Neighbours. If you are interested in or think that your website could benefit from some good animation, I strongly recommend that you get these books and have a think about what it is that would be worthwhile for your audience. I will just show you a couple of examples very quickly of the kinds of things I'm talking about when I'm talking about good animation. One example is using contrast changes to create distinctions. So in this example, we've got a tab panel, and as each tab panel becomes the active one, you can animate the change in color, which is a change in contrast, which is picked up by our what system, in order to show this one as the one that is most important at the present moment. Another thing you can do, and this is an example that came from Val Head, is when you someone has submitted something, and it may take a while for the website or for the server to respond, what you can do is show a little, change the icon, maybe have a little loading animation that's not too attention grabbing, but just in the exact spot where the user is clicking and looking. This is particularly useful on single page applications where you're not going to get an entire page reload for the content. It's just a little moment there in the spot where the person is actually already paying attention. And it just gives them that feedback to say, yeah, we heard you, we're going to work this out. My last little example is of state changes. And again, we get back to that showing and hiding kind of situation where a strict cut from one state to the next, say in the accordion panel example that I have here, it can be quite harsh. And if the person has looked away for a moment or been distracted, they can look back and sort of think, oh, where did my content go? Animating the change as it happens helps people, again, it tags into that what system, the where system, and helps people understand, oh, it's sort of squeezed up inside this menu item, and we've opened up a fresh one. So if I have persuaded you that a little bit of animation might be a good thing, how can we get the best of both worlds? How can we make sure that we're not hurting anyone at the same time as we're trying to get that little bit of user experience improvement? The first thing we want to do, or the main thing we want to do, is give the user control, and we have two methods for doing that at the moment using our current toolset. I have got a little bit of code in the next section, but if you are not a developer, don't let that worry you. Just sort of pay attention to the keywords that you'll be using to tell your developers so that they'll think that you absolutely know exactly what you're on about here. I'm not testing anyone on CSS or JavaScript today. Every major operating system now has an option where you can reduce the animation that is present not just in the operating system, but in the software and what's in the browser. These are usually called reduce motion or remove or reduce animations. And they're actually really, really wonderful. Apple first came up with this after everybody complained about iOS 7 having the apps kind of zooming in and out at you. And then everyone sort of went, well, that's a really good idea. We should all do that. Now, the good thing is that when we get to the web, we have the option of providing an alternative. Whether someone has toggled this setting on or off, we can provide an option for both. The way that we do that is with media queries. Now, there are media queries available for both CSS and JavaScript, so it doesn't matter how your animation is working or how it's built on the website, you can definitely use this method. I'm going to use CSS as the example, but it works the same way with JavaScript. What you do is you start off with your CSS. And so what my example is here is I've got a modal, and what the effect that I want to have to help people understand where this content comes from is to have that when the user clicks on a button to open a modal, the modal grows from that point, zooms out to its full size, or scales up to its full size. And then when the user closes it, it scales back down to the button where it came from. And so there's sort of an implication of where the content is coming from and going to. Lovely for people who need it. Creates a horrible zooming effect for people with vestibular disorders are particularly probably going to find that quite distressing or create a problem for them. So what we do is we use the media query and we say prefers reduced motion. If it equals reduce, then we just use zero transition. I've got transition equals none here. You could, if you wanted, go for maybe an opacity change instead. But what I've done is to be very safe. I've just gone with no. First you don't see the modal, and then you do. And then it's gone away again. Eric Bailey has some articles over at csstricks.com that talk about some ways that you can make use of these media queries in a way to get really nice effects for everybody. So if you sort of want a more technical implementation information, that would be the place that I would look. So this is a really easy way to meet your AAA success criteria of 2.3.3, which is animation from interactions. I personally wish that this was not a AAA criteria. I think the consequences of not meeting it are quite severe, and I would love to see it be a level A, but we work with the WCAG we have, not the WCAG that we wish we had. But, you know, it's just one way of respecting the user's choices. The problem with this, or the drawback rather, is that not everyone actually who might benefit from this user setting actually knows that it exists. So hopefully the second method that I'm about to tell you about will also can be used to help in that way as well. So the second method that I'm suggesting people use is one from the bad old days of Flash animations, is to have a toggle that turns the animation on and off, and to make it nice and visible up front to the user. I think this is pretty great. You can use it, I've seen it mostly used so far on websites which have lots and lots of animation, but I really wouldn't mind seeing it on websites that really only have little bits of user interface animation as well. If you've got a web app with lots of settings where users can customize and personalize, that would be a great place to put this kind of thing, with perhaps a little bit of an explanation of what it's for and what effect it will have. The interesting thing is that Marcy Sutton came up with a way to actually keep track of what the user has chosen. So when a person uses that turn animation off or on toggle, what she does is she stores its current state in local storage in the browser. Local storage is it's similar to cookies, to setting a cookie to remember, and so that way if the user comes back to the website, they find the animation in the same state that they left it, so they don't have to muck about with the toggle that second time. Again, I think this is really, really nice. I think you should be using this kind of thing as well as prefers reduced motion, not instead of. One of the reasons being that people with vestibular disorders or migraines don't always have a bad day with it. Sometimes you're fine with a little bit of animation, and other times it's just definitely not a good thing for you. And I think there's also the fact that, as someone who doesn't have these issues, sometimes I'm in the mood for a bit of animation, and sometimes I'm just like, please stop whirling things. I just want to get on with my life. So I think it's nice to sort of put it up front where everybody can make that decision in the moment, rather than having to make a permanent decision or a long-term one in their operating system. I think this just gives the theory of accessibility that we always have, and the principles that we work to, is giving the user control over how they experience a website. And I think this kind of two-step method can be really helpful in that way. So if I have persuaded you to use a little bit of web animation, these are the two methods that we'll be looking at: is respecting the user's settings and giving them a little control toggle, and hopefully remembering it for the next time that they come back. The other idea that I would like to suggest is perhaps you might like to use this opportunity to educate people with your toggles. When they toggle it on or off, you could say, did you know that there is a setting for this in your browser that you could be using, not in your browser, in your operating system, that you could be using everywhere instead of just on this website. Sometimes people don't know about the settings that they would in fact love to be using, and this could be our part of making that a little bit more commonly known. I've put my links to some of the research, the part that isn't paywalled, and some tutorials about animation and using it wisely on a Pinboard tag. But if this is really interesting to you, please find me in the chat or on Twitter, or drop me an email. Thanks so much for your time.